In many football clubs, you'll hear data referred to as a separate entity. We do data or we have a data department. You don't have that at Red Bull Racing. Data is the lifeblood of what every department does.
How do you even begin to kind of like separate the hype of this piece of tech or this data set from those that actually have real impact?
To give you a bit of a call out here, I think Swansea were doing some really special work in the Premier League at that time, punching above their weight because of the mindset that was at that football club.
I think all too often, all roads lead to wins and losses. But I would argue that there's maybe potentially too big of a leap, and there should be steps between what you're doing on the ground and that ultimate desire to win more games. So the story that I really like to call upon.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit Performance Podcast
in association with award-winning sports technology and innovation company Genius Sports.
In this 5-part series, I aim to speak to the people that sit at the unique intersection between the boardroom and the dressing room, providing practical insights regardless of which side of the line you're on.
Today, I sit down with someone who has walked both sides of the line, from advising elite sports organisations at Deloitte to living the daily pressures inside a football club like Sunderland AFC. Now shaping strategy for rights holders around the world at Genius Sports. James isn't just a leader in the performance technology space, he's someone who understands the nuance of bridging performance insight with business strategy. This conversation isn't just about tech, it's about why sports organisations sometimes get it wrong and what the best do differently to get it right. James, welcome to this podcast. Currently, you're the head of partnerships at Genius Sports, but you and I first met approximately 10 years ago when you were the senior manager at Deloitte Performance Analytics. And I've obviously witnessed your career evolve over the last 10 or so years. Can you start by providing us with an insight into actually what sparked your passion for performance analytics, sports tech, and its role in the business of sport?
Yeah, absolutely. So I first started out as an engineer, actually, but I'd always wanted to have a sports focus in what I did. And I had my eyes set on sports engineering, so designing sports equipment, essentially. I had the opportunity to work with a local wheelchair rugby team, otherwise known as Murderball, probably the coolest name for a sport going. I loved it, totally caught the bug, absolutely loved it, and really got hooked at that point. However, what stood out to me was that I needed to know more about how those athletes move, particularly in wheelchair sport. It's an important part of how the athlete and the chair combine with one another to get the outcomes that they're hoping for. So I thought I need to educate myself on this. And I went away and did a sports biomechanics master's. And during that, I was lucky enough to work with the England cricket team. This is kind of, if you're a cricket fan, peak sort of English cricket in my mind, of between 09 and 10. The two Ashes series, England were dominant. They were a really, really top side. And I worked on a project with their spin bowlers and wrist spin bowlers, to be more specific. And that was the point at which I was like, I want to work with the athletes directly. I don't want to work with inanimate objects anymore. I want to be working with the athletes and influencing their performance and how they improve. And it all really snowballed from there, to be honest. I did that for an academic year, got some internships with British Athletics, spent some time at Opta, and then ultimately ended up at Deloitte leading their sports analytics practice. And that's obviously where you and I connected.
You mentioned that your passion was sparked to go and work with athletes direct. During your time then working at Deloitte, did you get the opportunity to do that?
Yeah, it depended on the project, really. In some cases, typically the smaller organizations, there was more direct lines of access. So I spent a couple of Olympic cycles with British Skeleton and got some really good opportunities to work with those athletes. She won the first ever Winter Olympic gold for GB. So that was kind of an incredible experience to be a part of. Probably my personal favorite, I'm a huge cycling fan, working with a pro cycling team who at the time were called Team Dimension Data. These days, after a few different iterations, are now called Q365. It's quite an open sport, cycling. It's a very close-knit. You travel around the world together. You stay in different hotels together. You're constantly on the move. So there was great opportunity to, again, really interact more closely with the athletes and get their feedback. And, you know, they're ultimately the pointy end of the stick. They're the ones you're trying to help get better at what they do. So the more feedback you can get from them, the better. So yeah, I always try and open up opportunities for myself to get some access, get some time with them, and hopefully add some value in return.
Really interesting that the chat around adding value in return was very much focused on what you could do in terms of leveraging technology and data into those organizations so that the athletes and the organizations would benefit from that. I'm thinking sports organizations face multiple challenges in this space. Was it your skill set that you feel as though you brought to the table and added value as being able to leverage this, or was it their internal desire? What sort of challenges did you come across?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my perspective, I was trying to bring my expertise in that space with data and technology. For the company more broadly, we're trying to bring learnings from other industries and the work that they've done with data and technology and bring that into sport. That's really how that sports analytics team blossomed and grew out of some really excellent work that had been done in the telco industry. There was an idea by one of the partners to take all that expertise and try and apply it to sport, and then in time bring sports practitioners like myself in to better contextualize it. And it grew out from there. So yeah, I was trying to bring a bit of all of the above, really, a bit of my own personal learning and understanding from my background. I was trying to bring all the experiences from other clients we'd worked with in other industries. You're trying to really maximize the learning, the process improvements that can be found through the better use of data and technology in a sports organization. But I think I'll caveat that slightly with the fact that, when that journey first started at Deloitte, I think it was around 2014. So we're still talking relatively early days with respect to data, at least in English sport or sport within the UK. It was being used and things were being done, but it was the term we would use, it was sort of dabbling rather than doing. And I think we were trying to help sports organizations to do data and do technology a lot better than just having a little dabble.
Do you feel as though, as that kind of external advisor to elite sports organizations dabbling at data, that you witnessed sort of anything that would constitute perceived best practice around people, processes, and the way they dabbled with data?
I think there was some really good work going on. Possibly the biggest challenge at that time, it was being done in very isolated pockets. A lot of good works, maybe inter-department, but not intra-department. So sometimes the potential benefits that could have been found by having a more strategic and coordinated approach towards it were maybe being slightly missed. And again, that was part of the role as a consultant, really, to come with that external perspective and kind of just shine a light on that and say, well, look, there's some good stuff going on here. It could be better than it is. And I think in sport, there should always be that desire to find a better way of delivering the work that you do. So we were trying to expose that and give an impartial perspective to these sports organizations that there's always ways to get better. There's always ways to find improvements. And dare I say it, in sport, there's always marginal gains to be found. That was what we were trying to do for these organizations over the years.
Is there a specific example from a club or a sports organization where you feel as though that dynamic played out particularly well, and any learnings that you can share?
Yeah, I really found, particularly within the Olympic teams, so I think I worked with 5 or 6 different Olympic teams over 3 or 4 Olympic cycles, no, maybe 3 Olympic cycles, I think it was, both summer and winter. The smaller the budgets, the less resource, the smaller the staff, the more desire to innovate and find creative solutions. Also, dare I say it as well, actually, the higher the stakes, your ultimate goal is to win something every 4 years, and, you miss your opportunity and you're waiting another 4 years, or you may never get that chance again. So I did find within those teams that although there wasn't money flowing freely from big corporate sponsors and things like that, there was this huge burning desire to do the best you could possibly do with what you had at hand and find new and different ways of approaching problems to try and ultimately succeed in that very tiny window of opportunity you had every 4 years.
And that's super interesting around the ability to innovate when perhaps the stakes are high, but the budgets are small. Do you think that kind of gets flipped when, the budgets are high and the stakes are high, and that people have become a bit sort of like fear avoidance of innovation?
I think it's a potential pitfall. Definitely. I definitely think that you can become comfortable or maybe complacent in that kind of space where resources more readily available. And I also think that the various different technologies and data companies that are trying to serve them are also, have their own commercial interests at heart as well. So it's harder to find the balance, I guess, when there's more money at stake in the relationships. But one of the things that really stood out to me with those Olympic teams is they had a really clear process for understanding what their challenges were and how to structure a pathway to resolve them. So they went out and really, really well articulated what they needed to accomplish and how they intended to accomplish that, and looked for the right pieces of the puzzle that were going to solve that for them. I think when you're flooded with different options, different providers, different ways of working, it can be harder to do that because there's multiple answers to that puzzle. It can be solved in multiple ways. So I think that can make it a more challenging job for those organizations where there are more ways of getting to the right answer.
That's a common theme in life, isn't it? That there's lots of choice these days. So yeah, I can see how that might be the case for organizations that have multiple options because of bigger budgets. You yourself transitioned away from Deloitte as an external consultant to some of these elite sports organizations and went to work in football at Sunderland Football Club. What made you want to do that? Was it the desire to sort of be hands-on, impacting, players, athletes directly as an internal stakeholder rather than a sort of an external advisor?
Yeah, absolutely. That was certainly a huge motivator. I think as a consultant, you get this great opportunity to work on a wide variety of projects, which gives you the ability to learn lots of different ways of working. And you get to work with some really top draw operators, from those Olympic teams, from the rugby teams. I mean, I hope they don't mind me name checking them as organizations, but fortunate enough really early on to work with Saracens, who I think are a wonderfully well-run rugby club. Hawthorn Hawks down in Australia in Aussie rules, quite possibly for my money, pound for pound, the best kind of performance departments in the world, I would argue. And, we were working there, gosh, a good 8 years ago now, but yeah, they were really trailblazing at that time. And dare I even say it, Rich, to give you a bit of a call out here, I think Swansea were doing some really, really special work in the Premier League at that time. And they, again, were kind of punching above their weight because of the mindset that was at that football club. And you were an instrumental part of that. But yeah, so, I really wanted to take the things that I'd learned from you and many others in different organizations and bring that to one place and deliver it there and take ownership fully for it rather than just advising on it. Sunderland was a brilliant opportunity, a huge, huge football club, an incredible fan base, brand new owner at that time, youngest ever chairman in the Football League, looking to go about turning around the fortunes of that football club in a way that really resonated with how I would have approached it had I had billions in my bank account to do so myself. So yeah, it really aligned nicely and it was a great opportunity. I mean, with all that being said, still very hard yards. I won't lie to you, it's tough going, but yeah, the opportunity to do that and take all of that knowledge that I'd accumulated over best part of a decade in the sports industry was something I'd long had a desire to do. So the stars aligned nicely for me on that one.
While you were at Sunderland, and knowing personally what some of the challenges are like operating within a sports organization or a football club to get your performance ideas across, do you feel that you managed to do that and have the impact that you wanted to have at that particular football club while you were there?
Yeah, in many different ways. Yes, absolutely. I think I'm hugely self-critical in that sense. And I think I can always do better than I've done. And I'll always reflect on the work that I've delivered and think, okay, if I'm doing that next time somewhere else, how would I do that slightly differently? What's the learning to take away? But yeah, absolutely. And so my remit as the head of analysis of data was to be responsible for the traditional video analysis team. So that would be your analysts at the first team level all the way down to the young academy age groups and the women's team. And the remit within data part of my title was cutting across all the performance departments and how they interacted with data. And some of those, sports science and medicine, for example, are typically a little more advanced in that space. Others, coaching, maybe use data less so. And it was trying to level up each of them in their own way relative to their current abilities, the technological capabilities that they had, and the data that they had available to them as well. So, I was really trying to create a I guess, a cultural change to the organization as a whole as to how they embedded data and leverage technology within their working practices. So, there were some big long-term projects that were sort of 10-year projects that I knew I might not be there to see the end of. And there were some, very quick win, let's figure something out in a short space of time projects, more like when we were in the League One playoff finals, for example, 10-day short window to do that little bit extra on the analysis side to try and gain an advantage in that one particular game. So yeah, lots and lots of different successes in different shapes and sizes. And hopefully, that club is got a really good foundation to build upon. And I know the organization that has taken on the work that I left behind, and they were an organization that I brought in at that time, and they're doing really good work there. And yeah, they're the Premier League now. So hopefully that's played some role in that club's turning around their fortune.
Absolutely. I think you're probably being very humble, James, in some of the groundwork that you've laid at that football club. But I hope you can feel proud for the part that you've played. That's all we can really aspire to, isn't it? Is to move something greater than ourselves forward. You left Sunderland and transitioned into the world of being an external provider again at Genius Sports now. What does your current role at Genius Sports as the head of sport partnerships involve, and what's the focus with sports right holders?
So we at Genius we work with hundreds, over 200, I think, different sports organizations. So there's a huge pool of different partners that we interact with on a regular basis. And, my role is to be a part of maintaining and leveling up those relationships so that we can serve them in the best possible ways with the most innovative and sort of cutting edge technologies that we think is available in the industry to date. Predominantly in the more recent past, my focus has been with semi-automated offside technology. Hopefully it's made some ripples in the press and a few people have paid attention to that. I don't think anyone ever gets super excited about officiating, but it's an innovation that I think should really help push the game forward and really help the VAR process in general be more widely accepted by the public and appreciated for the value that it brings. So that's been a big chunk of my focus lately, is working hard to ensure that was a smooth and successful rollout, which so far 3 Premier League match weeks and 3 FA Cup match rounds into its delivery has gone pretty well. So, we're quite happy with how that's been. And, it's probably the biggest technological advancement that the Premier League have ever made, arguably. I guess I'm biased on that one, but, so it's a huge leap forward. And I think it's really important, and it really sets a standard for the adoption of technology within football, doing it in the biggest and most exciting league in the world. Really sets a good standard for the advancement of officiating in football as well, and the speed and efficiency and accuracy of officiating. So, it's really setting some benchmarks for what best in class looks like in this space. So, yeah, it's been an incredibly exciting project to be an incredibly technology complex project to be involved in, but one that hopefully ultimately comes out the other side with a very simple and easy to digest answer for fans and clubs and players and coaches alike to appreciate.
Having responsibility for a technological deployment like that with so much scrutiny on it was somewhat daunting, but challenging and exciting at the same time. Is there anything you've come across from that deployment, from a challenge perspective, that you feel as though is a worthwhile share?
Well, yeah, without question, it's challenging. There's a lot of scrutiny. I think the thing that really has stood out to me in this process, I've done some work in officiating in other sports in the past, but it's really stood out is being perfect is really the only acceptable outcome for match officials. Getting every decision. My respect for them was already very high, but has really just gone sky high now as to the challenges of that role and how you can possibly make a right decision with 40, 50, 60,000 fans screaming at you all within a fraction of a second is beyond me. But, so that in itself has been a massive, massive eye-opening experience for me. And then making sure that what we are doing is not adding any more pressure in that process has been the really critical element to it. So, much like we touched upon earlier with getting the opportunity to get feedback from players, it's the same with the referees and the match officials. It's how can we make your life easier? That's what we're here to do. We're trying to take some of the pressure off. We're trying to take some of the attention away and stop this being a process that is exclusively human and trying to use technology to aid decision making. And being able to deliver that is not an easy feat, especially when you're working in a method of delivery that really hasn't changed in about 100 years. So it's a really interesting challenge to face up. And I think a huge amount of transparency and trust and openness in the conversation with your key stakeholders is probably my big takeaway from that. There's no point trying to brush things under the rug or trying to hide any deficiencies in what you can and can't deliver. Ultimately, at some point or another, it's going to rear its head for you. So I think just that kind of really opening the book up and saying, look, this is what you should expect, and this is what we intend to deliver for you. And is it serving your needs and interests in the way that is going to be beneficial? I think the secret to what has so far been a successful delivery.
That's a great insight, James. I heard you say about being transparent and the word trust and also the word perfect in it. My mind was racing to think, well, it's not a perfect world. We're dealing with humans and human decision. There's always going to be imperfection. But listening to you talk about the transparency piece and how opening the book essentially helps you align expectations across the referee, the match officials, the clubs, the fans, and the league, and all the various stakeholders as being the sort of key to gaining trust in what you're doing. Would you say there's any other aspect of your project there that has helped garner trust across all the various stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've definitely been working incredibly closely to develop that trust. Trust is earned. It's not just granted. There's been a very intensive and collaborative rollout process where essentially the technology has been fully operational and ready to be deployed at any moment, but you can't be pushing that out until that trust is established and people fully understand what they're working with. So there was an extensive, maybe arguably even harder than going live in the Premier League, was working on gaining the trust of the people that are using that technology to help make decisions. Because at the end of the day, if a wrong decision is made, it's going to be the match official or the VAR that is the one that's probably going to have their name plastered across the papers. So we've got to do right by them, and we want them to trust what we're giving them, the information that we're giving them via the data and technology. The data that we're generating and the technology we're providing is something that they can stand behind and say, I made the right decision with the right information that was available to me at that point in time. And hopefully that will diminish any challenge that they might face in the future. But something I wanted to mention actually to your comment there is ultimately the biggest difference that fans will notice, I think, is that we're publishing a decision visual at the end of the process. We're trying to be transparent, not just internally with our stakeholders, but externally with our stakeholders, such as the fans and clubs as well. An incident happens, a player is either on or offside, and within about a minute, we've got the ability to share that with everyone involved in the process as to what actually occurred and what the decision should be. So we're trying to build trust with many different stakeholders, some of whom we have a direct relationship and some an indirect relationship as well.
James, great insight. And I think it's a very emotive topic for all those football fans out there. The strides that you and Genius are making there, I'm sure, will be for the benefit of the game and everybody that's in love with it. Data collection, coaching software, tracking, officiating. So much technology, so little efficiency. But what if one intelligent system could do it all and unlock the full potential of your league's data and video? That's where Genius Sports comes in. From the Premier League to the NBA, leagues all over the world are deploying AI-powered Genius technology to capture and analyze data. To streamline operations, create richer performance insights, automate officiating, and power more immersive, data-driven broadcasts. Discover the new operating system for sport, brought to you by the world leader in AI and sports data. Learn more at www.geniussports.com/perform. You mentioned Genius work with 200 plus sports partners. With such a broad portfolio, Can you give us an insight into what else Genius offer?
Yeah, absolutely. In its most simplest form, Genius provides three things: data, technology, and broadcast solutions. And they do that in three different ways. We've been focusing really heavily in this conversation already about the performance side of sport. And there's a suite of different solutions that solve a range of different challenges that the sports organizations have. Most recently, for example, there's a product that we've just released called ProView 3D, which basically recreates everything that's happened on a pitch or a court or anywhere else, and recreates that in a virtual world and allows you to see things from different perspectives. So it allows you to get down into the eye level of the player and understand what they can see in a game, and therefore help as a teaching and coaching tool when having conversations with players around what you want them to do. So rather than having that kind of beautiful zoomed out broadcast view that we're all used to seeing on TV, and being able to really see clearly tactically what options are available to the team, actually getting down to their level and saying, well, actually, can they see the things that we can see from up there in the stands? So really, really powerful tool.
Would that be multi-sport, or is it soccer/football specific?
Yeah. So the technology that sits behind it is really sport agnostic. It can be used in multiple different sports, and is hugely valuable and impactful for a range of different sports. So yeah, absolutely. It will be used in football. If you were to go on the website, you would see some beautiful videos of what that looks like, but it's also available to use in other sports as well. And increasingly, I think we'll see that rolling out further afield and into a more varied range of different sports over the coming year.
You've been on both sides of the fence as an external vendor and as an internal buyer, essentially. How have you experienced sports organizations approaching technology, whether exploratory or something a little bit more explicit?
It's a great question. And obviously there's huge variety there. Some are much better than others. I think the main thing that has really stood out over the years is, and I touched upon this earlier when talking about the Olympic teams, if you've got a really clear idea of the challenges that you're facing and the problems that you want to try and solve, I think you're much more likely to have success with sourcing the data and technology that is going to address those challenges. I think the key really is to think about what it is you want to try and accomplish. There's other factors to that as well that feed in. That's your key tenet in answering those kind of questions and the success that you're likely to have. But there are other ways of thinking about it as well. One of the keys that we're always looking to really lean in on is to make sure that the strategic decisions you're making around data and technology are really going to future-proof your strategy for you and stand you in good stead for an extended period of time, rather than be something that solves a very short-term need and then you're back to answering a similar or slightly modified version of the same challenge, a year down the line. From my own personal experience as well, I think there's some important questions that you need to be thinking about as well. How are you going to weave the data and technology that you're procuring into your working practice in a sincere and committed way? The last thing you want is to be spending money on these things and then not being used or leveraged to their fullest extent and ability. How are these solutions going to integrate with one another? You don't want to be replicating work between departments and things like that. So how can I find a way of getting these systems to talk to one another and minimize the manual effort and workload to get to the outcome that you're looking to get to? I think interestingly, I think in sports, we can be prone to be creatures of habit and to stick to ways of working that we trust. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I also think that it takes a degree of braveness to really challenge that way of thinking and say, is there a better way of doing this? Is there something that I could be doing to improve the efficiency of delivery or improve the accuracy of my insights or whatever it may be? But it takes a degree of motivation to keep that mindset and keep challenging perceptions to ensure that you're giving the best and most impactful value to your organization that you can. So yeah, I think there's a few lessons and things to really think carefully about when you're going through a process like that.
Like I take away from that, in summary, it is clearly define your use case and have a very strategic kind of deployment framework, which includes people and process and having that culture. Does that deployment framework often involve an ROI conversation. I'm trying to think about, as a performance practitioner myself, the times that I've been challenged when I've asked and made a use case argument for technology for a data set. Very rarely in my past did I kind of quantify the value add of this. And I just wonder if that's something that you've done or that you as Genius Sports potentially do for some of your clients.
Yeah, look, it is incredibly important to be able to articulate your ROI. In the same breath, I'll say it's incredibly difficult to do so in a performance space. I think all too often, all roads lead to wins and losses, and we try and quantify how impactful change within process technology or data has led to more wins and less losses. But I would argue that this may be potentially too big of a leap, and there should be steps between what you're doing on the ground and that ultimate desire to win more games. So the story that I really like to call upon is at Brentford. When they brought Thomas Frank in, they had really clear idea of what they wanted to accomplish with him coming in from a sort of key performance indicator perspective and what they wanted him to do. And he comes into the club and first 10 games, wins 1, draws 1, loses 8. And most football clubs, I would suggest he would be in trouble. If not losing his job, he would be right on the verge of losing his job, because too much credence has been put into just wins and losses and not the other indicators that the club find to be important into their long-term objectives. And at Brentford, because they had those things in place and he was meeting those key performance indicators and they weren't putting all their eggs in the win and loss basket, they kept him. And, you know, the rest is really history. And we all know how well Brentford have done over the years. I think what gets talked about less is his next 10 games, he didn't lose any. He won 6, drew 4. So, you know, it just goes to show the club didn't even have to really wait particularly long after that period to kind of prove themselves right in their thinking. But it just goes to show how clearly they'd articulated what they wanted to accomplish and how they wanted to accomplish it. And they weren't getting distracted by the noise of just winning and losing, because they knew that if they stuck to the plan, then it would come good eventually for them, because they put the work in and they made the effort to really understand that. So the same is true of data and technology implementations. You know, if you really understand what it is you want to achieve and have indicators of whether you're achieving that or are progressing towards achieving that, then you stick by those things and it should come good for you, and not to just immediately sort of panic, be reactive, kind of throw out the whole process that you've spent a long time working on and a strategy that you've planned out is, in my opinion, highly unlikely to be better solved by something you've scribbled on the back of a fag packet 10 weeks down the line because plan A hasn't quite worked how you were expecting it to work. So yeah, I think there's an important lesson to be learned there about setting smaller, more manageable targets that should ultimately play out into the bigger, wider objective of winning matches.
Interesting about how sticking with strategy and having more than just one outcome is important to achieving your goals there, particularly in the emotive world of sport. And that emotion brings me to kind of, where do we cut through the hype, particularly around data and technology, and how that intersects with the business of sport? You know, there's so many emerging technologies now. How do you even begin to kind of like separate the hype of this piece of tech or this data set is going to solve all your problems from those that actually have real impact? You mentioned about sort of having that use case and that deployment plan, but is there anything else that sports organizations can do to cut through that hype?
Yeah, look, the central core of all of that will always be understand what it is you want to try and accomplish. What is the challenge that you're trying to address? And everything else for me branches off of that. So, you know, is it a push or pull relationship with your technology or data provider? Are they coming to you saying this is something that's going to change your life? And you're sitting there reacting to that and saying, oh, maybe it will change my life. Or are you going to them saying, I need my life to be changed in this way. How can you do that for me? So it's a crude example, I guess, there, but I think there's an important distinction between the two. And you need to have your eyes and ears open to both directions. It's not to say that you should be operating exclusively in a push or pull way, but I think going and understanding what it is you want to accomplish and finding the suite of tools or the data sets that are going to solve those for you is, at least to my experiences, how I've found the most success over the years. If someone's coming to you without knowing what it is that you're trying to accomplish as an organization, I think that is a recipe for potential misalignment. And the better and stronger you can forge the relationship with that technology provider, and the more they understand what it is you're trying to do and the challenges that you face, they may be probing you and asking you questions to do that, and you might be pushing that over to them to try and help solve for you. But the stronger you can forge that relationship, I think the better the outcomes that you're likely to receive.
Got you. With that in mind, forging those relationships, is there any kind of like non-negotiable questions that staff should ask vendors or organizations should ask vendors when they're doing their due diligence?
Yeah, I think there's some for me that really stood out over the years. One of the big ones for me is around process efficiency. I think if your technology is creating more work for me, I'm immediately less interested in that. I want to free up people's time. I don't want people, just turning the wheel and grinding things out through a lot of manual work. The technology should be enabling the ability to generate insights and understanding of what you're doing within your performance environment, and not be something that you've got to constantly stoke the fire for and constantly feed that engine. I think trying to find technologies that are minimizing that workload has always been really important to me. So yeah, really think carefully about the capability that you're being given alongside the effort that you're going to have to put in with that to achieve that capability. And the balance might be healthy there, but it shouldn't be lopsided. Definitely shouldn't be lopsided. So that would be a big one for me. I think I'm always looking to avoid repetition. So if I have a system or a solution that's serving a purpose, I don't want to have to repeat that purpose within another technology. So the example that I always give here is scheduling. So many apps need to know the schedule of players, coaches, training sessions, recovery sessions, whatever they may be. How can I find a way to have a centralized scheduling system that feeds that information to all the other systems that require that information to populate the records that need to be held in each one of those different systems? I don't want to have to be entering my schedule into the sports science and medicine tool, plus the video analysis tool, plus the travel tool. I don't want to have to keep repeating these things over and over and over. So how can I find a way that these different technology solutions integrate with one another to avoid the repetition of effort? And I guess it speaks to the same point of process efficiency and added workload. And then the final one that I'll throw in there, which I talked about actually in my previous answer, but is really forging a strong relationship. And maybe that will come as no surprise to someone that has the name of sports partnerships in their title, but form a really strong relationship with your technology provider. Try to get visibility of the roadmap of where this product and solution is going, and make sure that aligns with the roadmap of what you want to accomplish. Even better, try and find some voice within that provider and their strategic direction, and add some weight into that conversation. Try and see if you can steer that path more in alignment with the things that you want to accomplish for your organization as well, because ultimately that is a huge part of the direction that these solutions are going to take, is from the feedback from the different organizations that are engaging with them. So if you can be a significant voice in that conversation for that group of stakeholders, then hopefully the alignment will be much, much closer to what you're trying to achieve, rather than what maybe another club or sporting organization is trying to achieve with the same technology. So they'd be my big three, I think, that I would always ask when engaging with technology providers.
With those things in mind, James, do you think that people look at technology providers and think, well, it does this, but it doesn't do that, and it doesn't quite meet our need perfectly. Therefore, we'll explore building our own solution so that we have this kind of bespoke, it meets our needs, we're fully aligned, and therefore the off-the-shelf stuff can kind of stay on the shelf, if you like. How would you view that kind of classic build versus buy question that lots of sports organizations kind of have to ponder?
Yeah, this is the classic question, really. And actually, I've flip-flopped on the topic over the years. And I think on reflection, the reason I flip-flopped is because it is very unique to the organization that you're in within the time. I think if you look at the build side of the question, you need to really understand what that entails. You need to understand the effort that's going to be involved. And my call out there would be, actually, it's not too challenging to build something from scratch. What is very challenging to do, and a lot of people neglect to account for, is the maintenance, maintaining something. And that can be a real anchor around your neck sometimes. So, don't just dive into the build pathway without really evaluating not just what it's going to take to create something out of nothing, but keep that something operational and working for your organization, because it's not for the faint of heart. It also depends, obviously, on the amount of investment that you've got available to you, the amount of resource, what's the long-term strategy? Is this something you want to build and develop and grow over the years? Or is it just a quick and dirty solution to a quick and dirty problem? So I would say the build option is one that should only really be considered by those that have a great understanding of what that entails from a technical delivery standpoint, but also the resources to be able to support that as well. And then if you flip that over on the buy side, it's kind of the opposite challenge to all those problems. So you get immediate capability, essentially. You get an organization of experts that can support your needs. You provide technical resource to resolve challenges that you most likely wouldn't be able to do within your own organization. So it's but also that comes with a caveat, like you said, you might hit the ceiling of what that technology is providing for you. So there's a balanced argument to be had on both sides there. One thing that I'll also add on the build side, and I think this is a pitfall I saw quite a number of organizations fall into in the early days of data within sport and in my consulting days, was not so much can you do it, can you build your own solution? The question should really be, should we build our own solution? The answer to can is often yes. Like, there's wonderful tools out there to build technical solutions. And it's making it increasingly accessible for people to build things for themselves. But could that time be better spent elsewhere? It's going to take a lot of resource, a lot of expertise to build something. And that's going to take you away from other things that you could be delivering. And for my money, those things that it's taking you away from is how you embed the capability that you've got into your working practice. How do you change the culture of your organization to leverage these new capabilities that you have in the most effective way? I think that is where the effort should be spent, rather than hidden behind a computer coding a new solution. It's very different depending on the different organizations that you're in. It's certainly not a one size fits all answer. It's something that you shouldn't just jump into without really considering the implications of how challenging that might be to build something for yourself.
Do you think lots of organizations overestimate their ability to build and their reasons or their rationale why they should build it?
Yeah, maybe not overestimate, but I would think there's probably a lack of appreciation for the complexity of what's required. So if you were to look at your average football club, and we'll take sort of the big six clubs out of this, what do they have available to them with respect to data resource? They might have an analyst, they might have a data scientist, and possibly nothing more than that. In quite a lot of clubs, they may even have one of those two people that I've listed. And what we're really neglecting to account for is that data is a vast area with a whole range of different expertises that are required to deliver these kinds of solutions. So we haven't mentioned data architects or data engineers, but these are very discrete and complex specialisms that are part of that broader data and technology ecosystem that are required to deliver those solutions. In real terms, if you want to do this well, you probably need someone to oversee the whole thing. That could be a chief technology officer or a chief data officer, something like that. You need an engineer to manage your data. You need an analyst to analyze your data. You need a data scientist to build models and do research with your data. You need an architect to design how the data should be stored and structured, that the engineer will then deliver the actual, it's almost like an architect of a house and then the builder that's building that house. So yeah, it's important that you really understand what is needed to get to a self-built solution, because it's not just bringing a data guy and he'll get the problem solved, or they'll get the problem solved. It's far more detailed than that.
All the various business-related implications that are affected by requiring all those people, if you went down that build route, for example. Do you think that affects then the cultural fit of how sports organizations approach using technology, leveraging data? And by that, what I mean is, over the years of senior leaders in sports organizations say that they want to be data-driven. Do you think that's true? Because if it were, then the investment would be sought to have all these people with specialisms in place to help organizations truly leverage data.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, this one. And I think sport has had quite a complex relationship with data and insight right since I started, really. And I've seen it evolve, and I think I've seen the language soften as well. So, I think it really started with being data led, and then sports organizations were often uncomfortable with that. And then it kind of changed to data driven. So, kind of a more balanced relationship between practitioners and data. Then data influence. So a bit more like, I'm kind of listening to what data has to say to me, but maybe I'm using it, maybe I'm not. And now I think the accepted language, and I saw this probably most recently with the new sporting director. I say new, he's been there a while now, but sporting director at Liverpool, Richard Hughes, who was referred to as data inspired. So, he has a good grasp of what data can give him, and he's going to run with the things that he sees value in, but maybe that's not every insight that he's being provided with. So, firstly, I think sport has had to really work and understand on what relationship it wants to have with data and insight and the value that it can provide. But the evolution also shows that there is a desire there. And I think there is a sincere commitment when you hear clubs and organizations talking about having data as an integral part of their strategy. I think what may be in alignment with my previous answer, maybe slightly missing, is the understanding of what that entails, and just quite what you need to do to get the things that you want is maybe the disconnect that we've seen over the years. But in the last 15 years of my career, probably every 3 years, I kind of say that this is the point. This is the point where data explodes and becomes a huge integral part of how decisions are made within sports organizations. And it's never quite happened in that way. But if I stand back and reflect on it, the curve has generally trended upwards over the years, and it is getting better year on year. And maybe that kind of data revolution that I envisaged will never happen in such an explosive way, but we are ultimately getting to the same destination, just on a more measured and controlled path, I think.
You mentioned Richard Hughes, the sporting director at Liverpool. Do you think that it's people in those kind of roles that make decisions, whether they're data-driven, data-informed or inspired, and they're the people that perhaps this data revolution are going to impact or are impacting the most? I know you've worked closely with sporting directors in your career and have undertaken a master's level of study in this space. So do you think that sporting director type role is the key one at this intersection of performance, technology, data, business?
Yeah, I certainly think they have a key role to play. Ultimately, my perspective on a sporting director is the most traditional, I guess, definition of the role, to oversee the whole performance side of your organization. So that would be your typical big six departments: coaching, recruitment, academy, analysis, sports science and medicine. I think I'm forgetting someone there, which is really bad, but in terms of 5 of the 6 at least I've remembered. But the key is for them to have a holistic strategy where all of them are delivering the most value they can as a collective to benefit the first team and the players and the academy development and so on. And without that role in place to have that strategic oversight across all of those teams would often operate in silos and not be maximizing the results that could be there for the taking because there's not enough intradepartmental conversation and integration of technologies to serve those needs and interests. I think it's really important for a modern progressive sporting director to understand what data and technology can provide in terms of value and make sure that is being woven into every one of those departments and the way they work, ultimately wrapping up into the collective whole of delivering the performance objectives of the club. One of the examples I really like to give, I work with the Red Bull racing team over the years, and in many football clubs, you'll hear data referred to as a separate entity. You know, we do data or we have a data department. You don't have that at Red Bull Racing. Data is the lifeblood of what every department does. So data is not its own separate thing. It's not managed in a separate way. It is a key fundamental part of the way of working in that organization. And I think that speaks volumes as to how they approach their performance objectives. And obviously, you know, maybe not quite as dominant they have been in previous years, but that has yielded huge reward for them as an organization. And it was a really striking takeaway for me when I've been in there and listening to different practitioners within their performance environment talk that it's not a separate beast. It's not something you can turn on or off when it's convenient for you. It's fundamental to everything that goes on, and it's just part of how you operate. So yeah, I think it's a really fascinating topic, and coincidentally enough, it's exactly what I'm writing my thesis on as well. So watch this space.
I was listening to you talk about Red Bull Racing. Do you think that sports that are inherently sort of more engineering and machine orientated are more aligned to kind of quantification of things as opposed to the kind of maybe more traditional field sports that are perhaps a little bit more subjective in their way of making decisions and planning strategy, etc.?
Yeah, I think they lend themselves to data and analysis more so than other sports do. I'd also say that the sport has really embraced the opportunity that presented itself to do that. You know, if truth be told, I'm not a huge motor racing fan myself, but you know, my understanding of how the sport has evolved is that a few blokes used to jump in a car that had been sort of tuned up by a mechanic and drive around a track back in the old days. But actually, at some point in time, someone started going, well, you know, how about I start looking at the time splits? And then, you know, how about I start looking at the G-force maybe that's involved in these things? And then how about I start looking at the tire temperatures? And, you know, that desire to think differently or gain a competitive advantage by having some information at your disposal that you could then use to make important decisions that were going to impact your performance is something that I think the sport was driven to do itself and really push that to the nth degree. And I think the same opportunity lies there in field sports. And, you know, if we focus on football, for example, it can be done. I think in this day and age, I think Genius is a great example of this with the capability that we have in AI and computer vision. We can codify and quantify most aspects of what's happening. I mean, there'll always be psychological things that are maybe slightly separate. We're talking purely like human performance here and physiological performance. A lot of these things can be really, really well coded if the desire is there to do it. And if the technology providers are pushed by the organizations to go down that path and develop solutions that are going to provide answers to challenges. So yeah, I think while it's maybe not as straightforward as a motorsport to get these data points, I would say in this day and age with the technological advancements that we have, it is very much possible to be done if there's a desire to do it. And those that have adopted it, I mean, it may be a bit pithy to say, but I think those football clubs that have made a sincere commitment to the analysis of data and the generation of insight to their football club have all had massive, massive success with it. I can't think off the top of my head of an example of a football club that has made that commitment and not done well with it. So yeah, I think there's great opportunity there. There's still plenty of low-hanging fruit, and those that really strive towards reaching that, I think, will gain a huge advantage.
I'd agree wholeheartedly that those that have committed to being data informed at the very least in the football space have made huge gains on those that perhaps have been a little bit more laissez-faire and traditional. Regarding kind of industry trends across the whole sports ecosystem, I'm certainly seeing organizations now exploring technology and data because there's this kind of FOMO in place, and they're seeing the success that those that have committed to the journey of leveraging tech and data for clearly defined outcomes. I'm seeing the demand for tech and data go up, and therefore I'm also seeing organizations offer a suite of products, a bit like Genius do, the solutions that you described earlier. What do you see as kind of the main driver for this consolidation of big companies offering a suite of products? Is it because there's this tech revolution, this data explosion that you talked about to happen, or do you think it's some other reason?
I think there's better work being done around understanding the challenges that organizations face and then investing in the technological solutions that are going to try and address those challenges. Maybe in times gone by, the challenges were known, but there wasn't investment being put into it. So I think the consolidation of these organizations to provide suites of products that are going to serve the interests of multiple different stakeholders within the club is to try and address some of those factors I was talking about earlier. So, gains in process efficiency or the ability for departments to communicate with one another on what they do. So if I give, and forgive me for sort of talking in technical terms here, but when an athlete, a player is stored within a system, that system will create an ID against their name, a unique number like your passport number that is an individualized record of who they are. And you can always find that person, even if they're two people with the same name, you can always find that person by their unique ID. The problem is every other system will do the same thing. So all of a sudden I've got 5 systems, I've got 5 IDs. How do I find a way of joining those together? And I might not be recorded in the same way. So I could be James Young in one system, I could be Jim Young in another, and Jamie Young in another, or James Alex Young in another one. So, how do I connect those all together? And that's a problem that you get when you start bringing in multiple technologies that don't necessarily integrate with one another. Whereas if you're looking at a more holistic suite of tools from a singular provider, that ID will be the same for me, regardless of which aspect of the solution that you're looking at. And that allows me to draw lines between different data sets and create new insights that wouldn't have been as accessible previously. So I think that's a really important factor in considering more holistic solutions, more consolidated solutions that are addressing multiple areas. It opens up new possibilities of data sets that I can cross-pollinate and find new insights into. I will also caution that you don't want to be in an ecosystem. You don't want to be closed off from the outside world. So I will also say, always say carefully if there's a data provider of yours that won't allow you access to the data that you're buying outside of their ecosystem, outside of their solution. I think that's always a good point of note when you're evaluating technologies. So I think there's some massive benefits to be gained, but there are some downsides to it as well. And both should be considered before you kind of leap in with one of these bigger solutions.
Got you. I think that ties in really nicely to what you were saying before about the whole kind of build and buy dilemma that clubs and sports orgs might have as well. Can they factor in this unique ID or guard against this walled garden scenario that might happen? Looking ahead, what, in your opinion, are the biggest game-changing trends that are on the horizon, the performance data space, the sports analytics space, that the business of sport needs to be aware of, essentially?
There's so many exciting things, honestly. I think one of the things I love about the space that I'm in is the rate of change and evolution is incomparable. I think if you look at where data analysis, insight generation, technology, has come from to where it is today, it has just grown at an exponential rate. So that is always hugely exciting. And in many ways, it makes it difficult to then look ahead and say, what's going to be the next thing up there? Because I couldn't have told you 2 years ago what is going on now would have happened. So God knows what's going to happen in 2 years' time. But there's some really, really interesting things. One of the things that I often say to this question is more work in the predictive space. I think we have a tendency within sport to be quite descriptive in the analysis that we do, and then extrapolate from there what the future might hold. And maybe in some cases, not even consider it. I think there's great opportunities, there's great advancements in machine learning and AI to be able to do this more readily and be able to try and make predictions about what you think might happen in a certain performance discipline. We could speak to a company that you worked for in the past called Zone 7, for example, who did a wonderful job of that in the sports science and medicine space. So I think there's some really exciting possibilities with predictions and trying to anticipate what is going to happen more than react to it. I really am interested in the virtual space. I think both the virtual reality space and the augmented reality space have huge potential. You hear about athletes talking about visualizing situations. You can see athletes sat with their eyes shut before a game, trying to picture the scenario that they're going to be in and what they're going to do in that moment. And with virtual reality, you can create those moments for them and replay them and train them as many times as you like. You don't have to imagine it. It's there for you to work with. Likewise, I think augmented reality can give that same ability to provide real-time feedback to athletes who are performing in their different sports and adjust accordingly and make corrective decisions based upon the information that they're being given as well. So there's some really interesting stuff. And then the final one I'd probably say there, one that's really close to my heart and I've been closely involved with for the best part of a decade now, is computer vision. I think it's unlocking a huge amount of opportunity in sport. One of the things that we do here at Genius is use computer vision to generate eventing data in different sports. So it can just be, rather than having a person or an individual sat watching a game and saying, this is a pass, this is a shot, whatever that may be, the machine can sit and watch the game as a human would and tell us what those things are. And actually that capability is an integral part of the semi-automated offside technology that we have running right now. Probably if we have this conversation again in 2 years' time, Rich, it will probably be so much more advanced than I've anticipated there. But yeah, it's a very exciting space to keep a track of.
Great insights, James. Thank you for sharing those. And I'll hold you to that around having this conversation in 2 years' time so we can look back on what you said. With the innovations and the trends that you talked about, please don't feel like you have to give away any secrets here if it's not appropriate. But with Genius Sports in mind, is there anything in those areas, something else that is in the pipeline that we can look forward to seeing coming and impacting the business of sport, the performance of sport?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The work that we do is hugely innovative, capabilities that don't exist presently anywhere else, that are going to just really empower decision makers within sporting environments to make better informed decisions. So there's some really, really exciting innovations that are going on. One, if people want to just do a quick Google and have a look at, is Genius IQ. It's kind of the engine that sits behind a lot of the capabilities that we provide to our sports partners that we work with. I think what we're ultimately trying to do here is provide solutions that are going to give a future-proof capability for many years to come, something that is so cutting edge and continually evolving in a way that you will always be able to make the most informed and most accurate decisions that you need to achieve the things that you're trying to do at your sports organizations. There's going to be continuing major advancements on the technological capability that we provide, and then also just spreading that into many more leagues and sports organizations than we already do. So really exciting time for Genius Sport, and yeah, watch the space.
Brilliant. James, conscious you've been talking for a long time. If people want to learn more about you and your work and the work that Genius Sports is doing, where can they find you?
Yeah, so obviously we've got our website where you'll probably find the most detailed descriptions of all the solutions that we provide to different verticals within sport. Our socials are really good as well, particularly our LinkedIn pages. We actually have a dedicated LinkedIn page for leagues and clubs to look at, and we post relevant stories and advancements of our technology that are being released to that community. So yeah, lots of good places and all the usual channels that you'd expect to see us.
Great stuff. James, really appreciate your time and having the conversation with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. I'll include more info about the guest and the topics covered in the show notes. Visit sportspundit.co to find previous editions of the podcast, access the newsletter, and sign up for our WhatsApp group to see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.